Where June 30th, 1983 happened near Irvington, outer Irvington, we were still only 10 minutes from downtown Indianapolis. And even at 40 years ago, which I cannot believe that it's been almost 40 years, but 40 years ago, Indianapolis still had a huge population. So, I mean, it was a really populated area where this happened.
Yeah. And I lived right there. Irvington is a very small little, it's what, 10 blocks by 10 blocks or something. It's a very small part, but it's an older part of Indianapolis. Great place. And that's where I had my first apartment. And so I've looked at everything on a map. And from my old apartment over to where your house was, it was just a couple blocks away. And I probably could have seen it happen if I was looking out my back window. And this area, because of where it is on the east side, is populated, and it's not, this isn't the country aspect that we're referring to now when we're talking about Indianapolis. And that craft came down and landed in your backyard. That's absolutely incredible. Did any neighbors or did anybody step out and say what was going on in your backyard last night?
Well, the lady that lived directly north of us on the north side of the house, we found out a little bit later that night she had seen a bright red flash and heard a loud noise. And like she said, her whole house shook, her TV turned red, and she got real paranoid. Her husband told Bud, when Bud, because when he did the investigation, the first time he came, he was knocking on doors, trying to talk to neighbors and stuff. And the guy next door told him that when he got home from work that night, his wife was so upset by the sound of something that had this loud sound and the red flash, and she thought somebody was trying to get in her house and get her, and she was like hiding behind a couch or something when he got home from work. And then the lady directly across the street from the house, which would be on the west of the house, she was a night shift nurse at Community Hospital and was asleep because she was going to be having to get up in a little while, go to work. But she was awakened earlier than her alarms went off because she thought that it sounded like a jet was about to crash into her house. And it startled her. And I think I can't remember for sure, I think it had an effect on the electricity in her house. And I know that some of the clocks closest, in the front of the house stopped working. And then Bud had talked to a neighbor, a couple of houses down to the south, down the road a bit. And they didn't see anything that night, but they told him that they had seen strange stuff above the house several times since we had moved in there. And we didn't even know anything about that. And then like 20 some years after Intruders was published, Bud got a letter from a gal who lived the street behind us on Hunter Road. And she told him that her teenage sons at the time used to like to have their buddies come over on the weekend, and they would camp out in the garage. And the open garage door faced the back of our house. But there's a lot of wooded area and huge lots between our house and theirs, Mm-hmm. But she said one night, and she said she couldn't specifically say it was that exact day, but she knew it was around that same time frame. The boys came in hysterical, and they told her that they had seen dozens of basketball-sized white balls of light floating through the woods between our house and theirs. And they panicked and ran inside. And she told Bud that they never slept out in the garage again after that. And what Bud thought was odd, and what we thought was odd, was that my mother that night, when she called me to come home, the reason that she'd called me was because she'd seen a ball of white light about the size of a basketball illuminate the bird feeder out in front of outside the kitchen window. And when she saw that light, that's when thought came into her head to call me that I needed to come home. So those are a few.
And that's the way it would have. It would have to be that way. There's too many houses. There's too much going on for this event to happen in your backyard. That the neighbors there had to have seen or heard something. Did you have any idea when that went down how significant it was? We all see camera flashes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know it's going to pass. In your case, it's a life of a trauma, injury, and other things, of course, too, as well. But did you know at the time that it was going to be that severe?
Well, I knew at the time I was in pain. When I first got hit with that ball of light as I came out of the garage door, and saw that bright white light, and like you said, it was like a flash bulb went off in front of me, and my eyes the vision was splotchy, so I had a hard time seeing. Later on that evening, when my friend and her daughter and I were in the swimming pool, my eyes started burning, and I noticed this white halo around all the lights that were outside. It was dark at that point. And I knew my eyes hurt, and I knew I felt sick to my stomach. And they actually felt kind of nauseated too, but their eyes weren't bothering them like mine were. The next morning when I woke up, my eyes were swelled completely shut.
Right.
And my mom took me to the emergency room. And the doctor, there was a doctor in the emergency room that happened to be an eye doctor, but he wanted my mom to take me across the street to his office so he could examine me. He had said he had better equipment to examine me in his office instead of in the ER. So my mom took me there. Why he was even there, I don't know. But, it took several weeks for my eyes to heal. In the meantime, the dog that had been out there with me that night started to have symptoms her teeth started falling out. First, her hair came out on her back, and we thought she had mange. But then she started getting big black oozy sores all up and down her spine, and her eyes started whitening over. And by that, I knew maybe 6 weeks later or so, we ended up having to have her put down. And she had been out there with me that night. And I know the thought had crossed me in the back of my mind, I wonder if it had something to do with that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if it had something to do with that night with my eyes. But I didn't tell the doctors at the emergency room the next morning, because until I saw the mark in the yard a couple of days later, I didn't remember getting hit with this white light, this bright light. I was in my mid-30s. I was diagnosed with macular degeneration and cataracts. And I'm dilated every 6 months since then, and my macular degeneration is dry and stable. I take a bunch of stuff for it, lutein and Xanthol, or however you say that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to have, finally, the cataracts got so bad that I had to have both my lenses removed and replaced, at a pretty young age, I think I had just hit 50, or maybe I was in my late 40s. I can't remember exactly, but it was in that area. I always thought in the back of my mind that my eyes were never right after that night. For about a year afterwards, my eyes would all of a sudden they'd turn red and just water for no reason at all. And then it would go away. And that first year after that night, the glands in my neck would swell up and for no reason. And then they'd go away. I'd get little hivey rashes on my cheeks. I'd get stomach problems. It seemed like my immune system was shot. Everything that came into town, I caught. And of course, I had the sleeping problem, and I developed irregular heartbeats, which they checked me all out with that. And they called them PACs, premature atrial contractions. But they said that it was benign. That's what the word they used, that it probably wouldn't kill me. Of course, the only thing I heard was probably.
Right.